They found her at dawn, beaten and tied to a fence post on the edge of Sweetwater Valley. Sarah Mitchell was the daughter of the only rancher who dared to stand against the Blackwood Gang's reign of terror. They thought breaking her would break her father's will, but they didn't count on a mysterious stranger riding through that morning. Hank Caldwell hadn't spoken a word in 15 years, not since the day he lost everything. But his actions that morning would speak louder than any words. His knife cut through her ropes and his guns brought swift justice to her tormentors. But this was just the beginning. What dark secrets drove this silent protector to wage war against the most feared gang in the territory? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first thing Sarah Mitchell felt was the coolness of a damp cloth on her forehead. Light filtered through her swollen eyelids, and the sharp smell of iodine hung in the air. Someone was humming softly. A woman's voice, gentle as spring rain. "She's coming around, Pa," the voice said. "Easy now, Miss Mitchell." The new voice belonged to Doc Wilson. She'd know that gravelly warmth anywhere. "You've been through quite an ordeal." Sarah tried to speak, but her split lip sent lightning bolts of pain through her jaw. The events of the morning crashed back, like a wave. Rough hands, cruel laughter, the splintered wood of the fence post against her back. And then silence. The stranger with eyes like winter steel. "Your silent friend brought you in just in time," Doc Wilson continued, checking her pulse. "Any longer out there in that sun?" He didn't finish the thought. Mary Wilson, the doctor's daughter, appeared in Sarah's limited field of vision, her face pinched with concern. "Those animals," she whispered, wringing out another cloth. "Sheriff Cole's supposedly looking into it, but Mary," her father's warning tone cut through. "The air." Sarah managed to turn her head slightly, taking in the familiar surroundings of Doc Wilson's clinic. The old medical bag sat open on a nearby table, its worn leather cracked with age and use. Underneath it, she glimpsed the corner of what looked like a letter hastily tucked away. "Where?" Sarah croaked. "Where is he? Your guardian angel?" Mary's voice held a hint of wonder. "He's still out there. Hasn't moved from his spot across the street since he brought you in. Just sits there watching, whittling something." Doc Wilson's boots creaked across the wooden floor as he moved to the window. 3 of Jake Blackwood's men were found dead. "Out by that fence post," he said quietly. "Clean shots, all of them, professional work." He turned back to Sarah, his weathered face grave. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, girl. Those Blackwood boys, they don't take kindly to the clinics." Doctor burst open and Thomas Mitchell filled the frame, his face ashen. "Sarah, my God, Sarah!" He rushed to her bedside, hands hovering uncertainly over her injuries. "My little girl. I'll kill them. I'll kill every last one of those bastards." "Mr. Mitchell," Doc Wilson's voice was firm. "Your daughter needs rest, not revenge talk. She's got 4 cracked ribs, a concussion, and enough bruising to paint a sunset. What she doesn't need is her father running off half-cocked and getting himself killed." Sarah reached for her father's hand, squeezing it weakly. Outside, she could hear the usual bustle of Sweetwater's main street, but it seemed different now, more menacing. Through the window's wavy glass, she caught a glimpse of a solitary figure seated on a horse across the way, his hands moving steadily over a small piece of wood. "Mary," Doc Wilson said, "fetch that new bottle of laudanum from the back room. Mr. Mitchell, a word in private, if you please." As the 2 men stepped into the hallway, Sarah heard fragments of their hushed conversation. Not the first time. Letters from other towns, pattern of disappearances. Mary returned with the laudanum, but Sarah's attention was fixed on the window, on the silent sentinel keeping his vigil. The late morning sun caught something metallic at his hip. A Chi, lawman's star, old and tarnished, half hidden by his duster. "I heard tell," Mary whispered, following Sarah's gaze, "that he rode with the Texas Rangers once. Before whatever happened to make him stop speaking." She helped Sarah take a sip of water. "Pa's got a friend over in Fort Smith who says there was a massacre about 15 years back. A ranger's whole family. The laudanum began to take hold, drawing a soft veil over Sarah's pain. As she drifted off, she thought she saw her silent protector turn in his saddle, looking directly at her window. In his hands, the wooden figure was taking shape, a small horse running free. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out a warning, and thunder rolled across the endless Wyoming sky. 3 days after Sarah's rescue, Hank Caldwell made camp on the ridge, overlooking the Mitchell Ranch. His fire burned low against the evening chill, just enough to keep his coffee hot. His hands moved steadily over a new piece of wood, a knife's blade, catching the dying sunlight with each careful stroke. Down in the valley, lamplight glowed in the Mitchell house windows. Ranch hands moved between the barn and the bunkhouse, their hands never far from their holsters these days. Since Sarah had come home yesterday, Thomas Mitchell had doubled the watch, but Hank knew better than most. Numbers alone wouldn't stop men like the Blackwoods. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention. Young Bobby Turner, the Mitchells, senior ranch hand, appeared through the gathering dusk. "Mr. Mitchell wants to know if you'd care to take supper with us," Bobby said, trying to mask his nervousness. "Miss Sarah's up and about some. Asked about you." Hank's only response was to reach into his saddlebag. He withdrew a small wooden horse, exquisitely carved, and handed it to Bobby. I'll see she gets it, sir." Bobby studied the figure with wonder. "You know, folks in town are talking. Say you used to be somebody before." He trailed off. As Hank's sharp gaze met his, a wolf howled in the distance, and Bobby's horse shifted uneasily. "There's something else," the young man said. "Riders came through today asking questions, Blackwood's men, but not the usual bunch. These were different, professional-like. One of them—" He swallowed hard. "One of them had a badge, U.S. Marshal's star." Hank's hand stilled on the new carving. In the firelight, his face was a mask of shadow. "They're saying you murdered those men in cold blood, that Sarah was never in any danger, that it was all just—" Bobby's voice faltered under Hank's unchanging expression. "Mr. Mitchell said they're lying, but—" A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the firelight. In one fluid motion, Hank doused the flames with his coffee, plunging them into darkness. His hand found Bobby's arm, pulling the young man down behind a boulder. 3 riders materialized from the shadows, moving slow. Moonlight glinted off their rifles. "Empty camp," one of them muttered. "Wilson's girl said he was up here." "Spread out," another ordered. "Marshal Cain wants him alive if possible, dead if not." Bobby's breath caught, but Hank's grip on his arm tightened in warning. They waited, silent as the grave, while the riders searched the campsite. One of them dismounted, crouching by the dead fire. "Still warm," he said. "Can't have gone far." In the valley below, a dog barked at the Mitchell Ranch. The riders turned toward the sound. "Check the ranch," the leader decided. "He'll turn up, they always do." Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Hank release Bobby's arm. In the darkness, he pressed a folded paper into the young man's trembling hand. Under the moon's pale light, Bobby made out a few words. U.S. Marshal's office and massacre at Broken Creek. The date was 15 years ago. I don't understand," Bobby whispered. Hank's reply was to mount his horse in one smooth motion. He pointed firmly toward the ranch, then turned his horse toward the high country. Bobby watched him disappear into the night, the wooden horse still clutched in one hand, the mysterious document in the other. Behind him, more lamps were being lit at the Mitchell Ranch, like fireflies in the gathering dark. Down in Sweetwater, all the way across the valley, someone was ringing the church bell. Storm coming. Sarah's dreams were filled with rope burns and cruel laughter, but it was the flames that finally woke her. She sat up in bed, her ribs protesting, and saw firelight dancing through her window. For one terrifying moment, she thought the Blackwoods had returned with torches, but it was just a campfire on the ridge, where her silent guardian kept watch. Unable to sleep, she made her way downstairs, each step a reminder of her healing injuries. Bobby Turner was at the kitchen table looking, troubled in the lamplight. A small wooden horse sat before him, along with a weathered piece of paper. "He's gone," Bobby said without looking up. "Marshall's men came looking. He left these." Sarah picked up the wooden horse, running her fingers over its smooth surface. "What's that paper?" "Part of an old case file. Broken Creek Massacre." Bobby's voice was hollow. 15 years ago, a Texas Ranger's family was murdered while he was on patrol. Wife, daughter, father-in-law, cabin burned to the ground. They caught the men responsible. A gang led by a former lawman turned bad, but the Ranger, he disappeared. Some say he went mad with grief. Others say he started hunting down corrupt lawmen, the ones who take blood money from outlaws. Sarah's hand trembled as she set down the wooden horse. "Like Sheriff Cole," Bobby nodded. "Marshal Cain's been tracking him for years. Says he's killed a dozen men, all with badges, all with connections to gangs like the Blackwoods." Outside, thunder rolled across the prairie. Sarah moved to the window, watching lightning illuminate the distant hills where Hank had vanished. "There's more," Bobby said. He hesitated, then pushed the paper toward her. The ranger's name was Henry Caldwell. His daughter, she was just 12. They found her tied to a post behind the cabin. Sarah's breath caught. The wooden horse seemed to stare at her with its delicately carved eyes. A commotion erupted from the bunkhouse, shouts and the sound of running feet. Bobby was up in an instant, gun drawn. Sarah's father burst through the door, rifle in hand. "Riders coming," Thomas Mitchell said grimly. "At least a dozen. Bobby, get Sarah to the storm cellar." "Pa, no, do as I say." Her father's voice was iron. "Blackwood himself is leading them. I saw his white horse." Sarah gripped the wooden horse tightly as Bobby led her toward the cellar. Through the window, she caught glimpses of mounted figures approaching through the rain-swept darkness. "They'll kill him," she whispered. "Your pa's got the boys ready." "We can hold them off." "Not Pa, Hank. They're pushing him right where they want him. All this—" She looked down at the wooden horse. "It's what they wanted all along. Me, the ranch, all of it. Just bait in their trap." Lightning flashed. Again closer now. In that brief illumination, Sarah saw a lone figure on horseback materialize from the shadows behind the approaching riders, silent as death itself. "Bobby," she said quietly, "get me Pa's spare rifle." Thunder answered like God's own judgment, and the night erupted into chaos. The first shot came from the darkness beyond the corrals. A ranch hand's cry of pain split the night, followed by the distinctive sound of a Spencer rifle, the Blackwood Gang's signature weapon. Sarah chambered around in her father's Winchester, trying to ignore the protest of her healing ribs. "They're pushing us toward the barn," Bobby whispered beside her. They'd taken position in the hayloft, against her father's orders. Below, Thomas Mitchell was organizing the remaining hands into a defensive line. Lightning illuminated the yard in stark bursts, revealing glimpses of mounted figures circling the buildings. A horse whinnied in panic as another shot cracked through the thunder. "Mitchell!" Jake Blackwood's voice boomed across the yard. "Send out the girl and Caldwell's ghost, and the rest of you might live till morning." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, but Bobby touched her arm. "Wait," he breathed. Through the rain-streaked window, a new figure appeared on the edge of the chaos. Sheriff Cole rode slowly into the yard, his badge catching the lamplight. "Thomas!" Cole called out. "Be reasonable! You're harboring a wanted murderer. Come out, let's talk this through!" Sarah's father stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. "Like you talked through giving the Blackwoods free rein in the valley, Adam? How much did they pay for that badge?" A horse screamed in the darkness, followed by the sound of men cursing. One of Blackwood's riders came galloping into view, his saddle empty. "He's here," Bobby whispered. More shouts erupted from the shadows. 2 quick shots, then silence. Lightning flashed again, and Sarah caught a glimpse of Hank's duster as he moved between the buildings like a vengeful spirit. "Burn them out!" Blackwood roared. "Burn it all!" Flaming bottles arced through the rain, shattering against the barn's wooden walls. Sarah and Bobby scrambled back as fire licked up the timbers. "Sarah!" Her father's voice, desperate now. "Sarah!" She ran to the hayloft door, Bobby covering her with the rifle. Below, Thomas Mitchell was fighting hand-to-hand with two of Blackwood's men. Sheriff Cole stood in the yard, watching impassively as the barn began to burn. Then, something changed. In Cole's expression, he turned slowly, reaching for his gun, but Hank was already there, a shadow materializing from the rain. "Should have killed me at Broken Creek," Cole said, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos. "After what your wife paid me to look the other way, I figured I owed you that much." For 15 years, Hank Caldwell had kept his silence. But now, as lightning split the sky and flames reached for heaven, he spoke. His voice was raw with disuse and fury. "Badge!" Cole's hand inched toward his gun. "What?" "Give me the badge." The sheriff's draw was fast. He hadn't survived this long. By being slow, but Hank had been waiting 15 years for this moment. The single shot dropped Cole where he stood, his corrupted star falling into the mud. Sarah's world narrowed to the sight of Jake Blackwood raising his rifle, aiming at Hank's back. Without hesitation, she brought her father's Winchester up and fired. The range was long, the angle poor, but sometimes justice guides a bullet true. Blackwood toppled from his white horse, and the night dissolved into chaos. When dawn finally broke over the smoldering ruins of the barn, 4 men were dead, including Sheriff Cole and Jake Blackwood. The rest of the gang had fled into the storm. Sarah found Hank kneeling in the mud, holding Cole's badge. Without a word, she placed the wooden horse beside it, a small offering of understanding. He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the rising sun. In them, she saw a glimmer of something that might have been hope. Dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and blood. Sarah sat on the porch steps, watching Doc Wilson tend to the wounded in the yard. Her father moved among the ranch hands, checking injuries and offering quiet words of thanks. The air still smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Hank stood at the edge of the property, digging graves. He'd insisted on doing it alone. 5 holes in the hard prairie earth, 4 for the dead outlaws, and a separate one for Sheriff Cole. The badge lay on a fence post nearby, its silver surface, gleamed of mud, but still stained with something deeper. "He spoke," Bobby said, settling beside Sarah with 2 cups of coffee. "After all this time, he actually spoke." Sarah took one of the cups, wincing at the pull on her ribs. "1 word. Badge. 2 words. Bobby corrected. "Give me the badge." "Dun, that's what Turner told me before they rode into town with news of the fight." Mary Wilson arrived in her father's buggy, bringing fresh bandages and news from Sweetwater. She hurried to help her father, but not before casting a concerned glance at Hank's solitary figure. "Marshal Cain's men were seen riding north," she reported as she passed. "But there's talk of more Blackwood riders gathering at their ranch. 20, maybe 30 guns." Thomas Mitchell joined them on the porch, his right arm bandaged. "We need to get word to the territorial governor," he said. "With Cole dead, there's no law here except what we make ourselves." "There's Hank," Sarah said quietly. Her father's face darkened. "A wanted man who hasn't spoken in 15 years, who brings death wherever he rides. That's not law, Sarah. That's vengeance. He saved my life, all our lives, and I'm grateful, but—" A horse's whinny interrupted them. Hank had finished the graves and was leading his mount toward the porch. He carried something in his hand, the wooden horse, now stained with mud and smoke. To everyone's surprise, he climbed the steps and held the carving out to Sarah. When she took it, his calloused fingers brushed hers. His eyes met hers for a long moment, and though he didn't speak, she understood. "Pa," she said, her voice firm. "Hank stays." Thomas Mitchell looked between them, seeing something that made him pause. Finally he nodded. "We'll need every gun we can get, but first." He turned to Hank. "I think it's time we heard the whole story. About Broken Creek, about Cole, about why the marshal wants you so badly." Hank's face remained impassive, but his hand moved to his throat, where an old scar peeked above his collar. Everyone waited, wondering if he would retreat back into silence. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew a battered tin-type photograph. The image showed a smiling woman and a young girl on a porch, not unlike this one. a wooden horse just visible on the railing behind them. When he spoke, his voice was like rusty hinges opening. They burned everything. Everything except this. Sarah reached out and took his weathered hand in hers. Above them, storm clouds gathered once again over the endless Wyoming sky. They gathered in the ranch house kitchen as night fell. Doc Wilson had gone back to town with the wounded, leaving Mary behind to help. Bobby kept watch from the front porch, while Thomas Mitchell sat at the head of the worn oak table, Sarah at his right hand. Hank remained standing, his shadow cast long on the wall by lamplight. "Emma," he said, touching the woman's face in the photograph. His voice was gravel and grief. "My wife, and Katie, our daughter." His finger trembled slightly as it moved to the young girl's image. "She loved horses. I carved her one every time I came home from patrol." Sarah held the mud-stained wooden horse, understanding now why he'd made it for her. "I was tracking rustlers near the Texas border," Hank continued, each word seeming to cost him physical pain. 3 days' ride from home. Sheriff Cole was supposed to be watching over the families of rangers in the territory. We trusted him, paid him extra from our own wages for the protection. He placed another item on the table, a charred piece of paper that might once have been a marriage certificate. Cole was working with the gangs all along, taking their money, telling them when rangers would be away. That night, his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. That night, he told them exactly when to hit my farm. Made sure no help would come. "Your family," Thomas Mitchell said softly. "They were tied to posts." Hank's voice was barely a whisper now. "Made to watch while they burned everything. Cole wanted it to look like an accident, but they got carried away. By the time I rode home—" He stopped. The words caught in his throat. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. After a moment, he continued. "I found Cole's deputies first, then the gang members, one by one. But Cole slipped away, kept moving, trading his badge from town to town. Each time I got close, more people died. Marshal Cain's been following both our trails ever since. And now he's caught up," Mary said from her place by the window, "along with what's left of the Blackwoods." "Let them come," Sarah said fiercely, surprising everyone, including herself. "We know the truth now. We can fight them." Hank looked at her with something like wonder. Then he did something none of them expected. He smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his entire face. "Not just fight," he said. His voice was stronger now, as if each word helped break the chains of his long silence. "Win." A shot rang out from the darkness, shattering the window. Behind Mary, Bobby's warning cry came from the porch. "Riders!" Thomas Mitchell was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Mary, get to the cellar. Bobby, round up the hands." But Hank remained still, looking at Sarah. In the chaos of movement around them, they shared a moment of perfect understanding. She nodded once. "Time to end this," she said. He drew his gun, checking the cylinder with practiced ease. Together. Outside, horses thundered through the night and someone was shouting orders. The Blackwoods had returned in force, but they'd find no easy prey this time. This time, vengeance and justice would ride as one. Moonlight caught the glint of rifle barrels in the darkness. Sarah counted at least 15 riders spread out along the ridge, their horses stamping restlessly in the night air. More shapes moved in the shadows behind them, reinforcements waiting. Their turn. "They're not just Blackwood's men anymore," Bobby whispered from his position beside her at the barn window. "Some of those riders are wearing badges. Cain's men," Hank confirmed from the doorway. His voice was still rough from disuse, but growing stronger with each word. "Using the Blackwoods as cover for their own hunt," Thomas Mitchell's voice carried from the ranch house. "This is private property. You're trespassing on legal holdings. Of the territorial..." A volley of shots cut through his warning, splintering wood and shattering windows. Sarah heard Mary scream from the cellar, followed by her father's answering rifle fire. "Sarah," Hank's hand touched her shoulder. "Your father's men won't hold against this many." She turned to face him, seeing her own determination mirrored in his eyes. "Then we make them fight shadows." A rare smile touched his lips. He understood. They'd prepared for this during the afternoon, setting up false positions, moving lanterns to create misleading targets. Now Sarah nodded to Bobby, who kicked over the first oil lamp, starting a controlled blaze at the empty bunkhouse. The fire drew immediate attention. Riders converged on the flames, silhouetting themselves against the night sky. Sarah's rifle cracked twice, followed by Hank's precise shots. 3 shadows tumbled from their saddles. "Marshal Cain!" The shout came from the darkness. "We know you're out there, Caldwell. 15 years of running ends tonight." Hank's only response was another shot, another rider down. The battle devolved into chaos. Thomas Mitchell led his remaining ranch hands in a flanking movement, catching the attackers in a crossfire. Bobby proved himself a deadly shot from the barn's hayloft, while Sarah and Hank moved like ghosts through the shadows, striking and vanishing. Then Sarah heard it, her father's cry of pain, followed by triumphant shouts from the attackers. "We've got Mitchell. Surrender or he dies." Sarah started forward, but Hank caught her arm. In the moonlight, she saw something dangerous flash across his face, a decision being made. "Trust me," he whispered. Before she could respond, he stepped into the open, guns holstered, hands raised. "Cain!" His voice boomed across the yard. "Just you and me now, like it should have been at Broken Creek." A figure emerged from the shadows, leading a horse. The marshal's star on his chest caught the firelight. 15 years, Cain said, his voice casual. 15 years of cleaning up your mess, Caldwell. All those dead lawmen. Did killing them bring your family back? They were corrupt, like coal. They were necessary. Cain's smile was cold. The frontier needs order. Sometimes that means dealing with devils to keep the peace. Your wife understood that. Why do you think she paid? Coal for protection in the first place? Sarah saw Hank flinch as if struck. Cain pressed his advantage. Oh, you didn't know? She knew what coal was, knew what we all were. Paid us because she was afraid of what her righteous husband would do if he found out. Afraid of the violence. In you, you're lying. But doubt crept into Hank's voice. Search your heart, Caldwell. You know it's true. Now kneel down in the dirt and we'll end this quick. Sarah had heard enough. Her rifle shot kicked up dust at Cain's feet, making him jump. He's not kneeling, she called out, and he's not alone. More rifles emerged from the darkness. Bobby, the ranch hands, even Mary Wilson with her father's old shotgun. They had. The marshal's position surrounded. Cain's smile vanished. Kill them all, he ordered. But his men had seen enough death for one night. One by one, they began to lower their weapons. In the silence that followed, Hank's voice carried clearly, You're under arrest, Marshal, for murder, corruption, and conspiracy. You have no authority here, Cain sneered. Yes, he does. Thomas Mitchell emerged from the shadows, limping but alive. In his hands, he held a letter bearing the territorial governor's seal. As of yesterday, when my letter reached Cheyenne, meet our new territorial marshal. Sarah's heart soared as her father pressed a pristine silver star into Hank's rough hands. Dawn was breaking over the Wyoming hills, and with it, justice was rising at last. The morning sun revealed the night's toll. 4 of Cain's men dead, 3 wounded. 6 Blackwood riders wouldn't ride again. The marshal himself sat bound in the ranch house, under Bobby's watchful eye. Sarah found Hank by the corral, staring at the new star pinned to his vest. His fingers kept straying to it, as if checking it was real. Suits you, she said softly. He turned, and she saw the storm behind his eyes. Cain's words were poison, she finished firmly. Meant to break you. But what if... No! She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. I saw my mother's face every time my father rode out on patrol. That fear, it's not about the man you love, it's about the world that might take him from you. Something shifted in Hank's expression. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, another piece of the burned marriage certificate. Found this in Cain's saddlebags, he said. Emma's writing. His voice caught as he read, "My dearest Henry, I pay coal not out of fear of you, but fear for you. The territory grows more dangerous each day. If my small sacrifices keep you safe on patrol, they're worth any price. Your heart is pure, my love. Guard it well." Sarah watched tears track down his weathered cheeks. 15 years of doubt and pain washed away by his wife's words. A commotion from the house drew their attention. Mary burst out onto the porch. "Cain's escaped!" she cried. "He had a knife hidden. Bobby's hurt!" They rushed inside to find Bobby pressing a cloth to a slash across his arm. Thomas Mitchell was already organizing men for pursuit. "He's headed for the Blackwood Ranch," Bobby managed through clenched teeth. "Said something about settling." "All debts." Hank checked his guns with practiced efficiency. "How many Blackwood riders left?" "Maybe 20, Thomas said. "Plus whatever other corrupt lawmen answer Cain's call. Then we'll need help." Hank's voice was strong now, sure. "Sarah, ride to town. Bring Doc Wilson and any men willing to stand for justice. Mitchell, get word to the neighboring ranches." "Cain thinks he's gathering an army." His hand touched the marshal's star. "Let's show him what a real one looks like." Sarah started for the door, but Hank caught her arm. Without a word, he pressed the wooden horse into her hand, the one he'd carved the day he found her tied to the fence post. "Come back," he said simply. She gripped the carving tight. "Always." As she mounted up, she saw Hank pin Emma's letter next to his new badge. The past and future, riding together at last. Behind her, the morning sun painted the Wyoming sky in shades of promise, while ahead, storm clouds gathered over Blackwood land. One last battle was brewing, and this time the law rode with vengeance, not against it. Sarah rode hard into Sweetwater, her horse's hooves thundering down the empty main street. Dawn was just breaking, and smoke still curled from the chimneys of the few wakeful households. The wooden horse bounced against her hip where she'd secured it in her belt, a reminder of why she rode. She found Doc Wilson already awake, tending to the wounded from the previous night's battle. Mary had started preparing bandages the moment she heard hoofbeats approaching. "Cain's escaped," Sarah announced, not wasting time. "He's gathering men at the Blackwood Ranch. We need every gun that'll stand with us." The doctor's weathered face hardened. "After what they did to you? What they've done to this valley?" He moved to a cabinet and withdrew a well-oiled Winchester. "Some wounds need more than medicine to heal." The church bells began to ring, not the usual morning toll, but a rapid, urgent peal. Through the window, Sarah saw people emerging from their homes, drawn by the sound. "That'll be Reverend Parker," Mary said, stuffing more bandages into her father's medical bag. "I sent word as soon as I got here." The Reverend's voice carried across the awakening town. "Good people of Sweetwater, too long have we lived under the shadow of corruption and fear. Today we have a chance to stand with justice." Sarah stepped out onto the boardwalk, surprised to see dozens of townspeople already gathering. Shop owners, farmers, ranchers coming in from the outlying homesteads, all drawn by the bell's call. Tom Weber, the blacksmith, approached her, his massive arms crossed. "Heard you got a real marshal now, one who stands against the likes of Cain and his ilk." "Marshal Caldwell," Sarah confirmed, her voice carrying. "The man who saved my life, who's been hunting corrupt lawmen for 15 years. "The silent rider," someone called out. "The one who speaks with bullets?" "He speaks now," Sarah said. "And he's calling for good people to stand with him. Cain and the Blackwoods, they think they own this territory, think they can break anyone who opposes them." Her hand found the wooden horse at her belt. "They tried to break me. Instead, they gave all of us a reason to fight back." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah saw faces she'd known all her life transform with purpose. Weber hefted his sledgehammer. "The Blackwood boys tried to take my shop last spring, said I had to pay protection. Time to show them what real protection looks like." More voices joined in, years of suppressed anger and fear turning to resolve. The general store owner offered ammunition from his stock. The livery stable opened its doors to mounted volunteers. Even old Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, appeared with a wagon full of provisions. "They hurt our children," she declared, fixing Sarah with knowing eyes. "No more." Doc Wilson emerged from his office, medical bag in one hand, rifle in the other. Mary followed with a wagon loaded with supplies and extra weapons collected from willing donors. "How many riders you reckon Cain can muster?" Weber asked as they prepared to move out. Sarah counted the mounting volunteers. "Doesn't matter. We have something they don't." "And what's that?" She touched the wooden horse, thinking of Hank's quiet strength, of her father's unwavering principles, of all the small acts of courage that had led to this moment. "Hope," she said, "and a reason to fight that's bigger than fear." The sun cleared the eastern hills as their makeshift army began to move. Sarah led them out of town, toward the Mitchell ranch where Hank waited. Behind her rode the heart of Sweetwater, not professional gunmen or hardened outlaws, but people who'd finally found the courage to stand. In her mind she heard Hank's gravel voice. Come back. She would. They all would. And they'd bring justice with them. The Mitchell ranch had transformed into an armed camp by the time Sarah returned with the townspeople. Riders from neighboring ranches had answered Thomas Mitchell's call, their horses stamping in the yard while their owners cleaned weapons and checked ammunition. Hank stood at the center of it all, the marshal's star on his chest, catching the morning light. The years of silence had melted away as he directed men with the quiet authority of someone born to command. When he saw Sarah leading the Sweetwater volunteers, something like pride flickered across his face. "Town's with us," she reported, dismounting. "Every able hand and gun." Thomas Mitchell emerged from the house, maps spread across the porch table. "Cain's gathered his forces here," he said, pointing to the Blackwood ranch. "Natural stronghold, backed against the cliffs. Only 2 approaches, both easily defended." "3," Hank corrected. His voice was stronger now, as if each word helped heal the years of silence. "There's an old mining trail that cuts behind the cliffs. Dangerous but passable." Weber, the blacksmith, studied the map. "We got enough men to split our forces?" "Have to," Hank said. "Cain's expecting us. He'll have scouts watching the main." "Approaches." Sarah looked at the gathered forces. Cowboys, townspeople, farmers with hunting rifles. Not soldiers, but people fighting for their homes. "How many guns they got?" "Last count, 30 riders," Bobby reported from his position by the stairs, arm freshly bandaged. "Maybe more if Cain called in favors from other corrupt lawmen." "Numbers aren't everything," Hank said. His hand touched the letter pinned beside his badge, Emma's last words. "They're fighting for money. We're fighting for something more." He laid out the plan, voice clear and steady. Thomas Mitchell would lead the largest group up the main road, an obvious threat to draw attention. Weber and the townspeople would approach from the second route, staying hidden until signaled, and the third group. "Sarah and I will take the mining trail," Hank finished. "Small team, fast and quiet, while Cain's men are focused on the main. Assault will come in from behind." "No!" Thomas Mitchell's voice was sharp. "Not my daughter, not after Pa." Sarah's hand found the wooden horse at her belt. "This started with me tied to a fence post. It needs to end with me standing free." Silence fell over the gathering. Then Bobby spoke up from his place on the stairs. "I'll ride with them." "No, those trails better than anyone." More volunteers stepped forward. Mary Wilson with her father's shotgun, 2 of Mitchell's most trusted hands, a grizzled old prospector who knew every crack in the cliffs. A small, lethal team. "Sun's getting high," Weber observed. "How long before Cain makes his move?" "He won't," Hank said. "Cain's a coward at heart. He'll wait in his fortress, thinking he's safe behind stone walls and hired guns." His eyes met Sarah's. Time to show him how wrong he is. The volunteers began breaking into their assigned groups. Thomas Mitchell pulled his daughter aside for a fierce embrace while Doc Wilson distributed medical supplies among the teams. The air thrummed with purpose and preparation. Hank found Sarah checking her rifle. Without a word, he drew a second wooden horse from his coat, newly carved, the wood still fresh. "For luck," he said softly. She took it, understanding. The first horse represented survival. This one represented choice, the decision to fight back, to stand for something larger than herself. For justice, she corrected. Around them, an army of neighbors and friends mounted up, ready to reclaim their valley. The Wyoming sun rose high, promising blood before it set. The mining trail was barely wide enough for single-file riding, a treacherous path carved into the cliff face. Loose shale skittered beneath the horses' hooves, falling away into the canyon below. Sarah rode third in line, between Hank and Bobby, both wooden horses secured in her saddlebag, twin talismans of how far she'd come. Old Jack, the prospector, led them with the confidence of a man who'd spent decades searching these hills for gold.
"Watch that outcrop," he whispered back. "False edge. Lost 2 mules there last spring." The sounds of battle drifted up from below, her father's forces engaging the Blackwood riders on the main road. The diversion had begun. "Cain's not down."
"There," Hank said quietly, reading the patterns of gunfire. "He's holding back, watching from the ranch house." "Like a spider in its web," Mary added from behind Bobby, her father's shotgun ready across her saddle. The trail narrowed further, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses. Sarah's ribs ached from the climb, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her of why they fought, of the cost of remaining silent in the face of evil. A gunshot cracked. From above, Old Jack's hat flew off as he dove for cover. "Look out!" Bobby's warning came just as more shots peppered the cliff face. Sarah pressed herself against the rock wall, feeling stone chips sting her face. Through the dust, she glimpsed movement on a ledge 30 feet up, 2 rifles glinting in the sun. "Can't go forward or back," Mary said, her voice tight. "We're stuck on the trail." Hank's eyes met Sarah's. Without words, she understood. They'd faced worse odds together. "Cover me," she said, and began climbing. The rock face was steep but broken, enough handholds for someone who'd spent their life working ranch land. Her muscles screamed as she pulled herself higher, using the shooter's own periodic fire to mask the sound of her movement. Below, Hank and the others laid down careful, suppressing fire, forcing the lookouts to stay in cover. Sarah reached their level and inched along a narrow ledge, both wooden horses clinking softly in her pocket. The first lookout never saw her. Coming! She brought her rifle butt down hard, and he crumpled without a sound. The second man spun at the noise, but Sarah was already moving. They grappled briefly before momentum and gravity did the work. He fell screaming into the canyon. "Clear!" she called down. When the others joined her on the ledge, she saw new respect in their eyes. Even Hank looked at her differently, not with worry or protection, but partnership. "Look!" Bobby pointed through a gap in the rocks. Perfect view of the ranch house. The Blackwood stronghold sprawled below them, a fortress of log and stone. Backing up against the cliff, Cain's horse was tethered outside, along with several others Sarah recognized as belonging to corrupt lawmen from neighboring towns. "Main forces still engaged on the road," Mary reported, studying the battle through field glasses. "Weber's people are in position on the far side, waiting for the signal." "How many inside?" Hank asked Old Jack. The prospector squinted. "Based on the tracks, 10, maybe 12. Cain's personal crew." Sarah checked her ammunition. "Enough walls and windows to make it costly. Not if we use what they don't expect." Hank pointed to a weathered wooden door set into the cliff face, a remnant of the old mining operations. "Where does that tunnel lead, Jack?" A slow grin spread across the prospector's leathery face. "Why, Marshal, that'd be the back door to their wine cellar. Blackwood's PA used it for smuggling during Prohibition." Sarah felt the wooden horses in her pocket, remembering another dawn, another moment of reckoning. "Full circle," she said softly. Hank nodded, understanding. Time to complete it. They left the horses secured on the ledge and moved toward the tunnel entrance. Behind them, the sounds of battle rose on the wind, while ahead, justice waited in the darkness. The mining tunnel was a throat of absolute darkness. Sarah felt her way forward, one hand on the rough wall, the other gripping her rifle. Ahead, Old Jack led them with the confidence of a man who'd spent half his life underground. Behind her, Hank moved like a shadow, his breathing steady and controlled. The air grew thick with the smell of wine and age. Through the rock they could hear muffled voices from above, Cain's men discussing the battle outside. "Cellar should be just ahead," Old Jack whispered. "Iron door's been rusted shut for years, but—" Mary's voice cut in. "Unless someone's been using it." Fresh boot prints marked the dusty floor, leading to where the old iron door stood slightly ajar. Cain had obviously discovered this entrance too. "Change is nothing," Hank said softly. "Might work in our favor. They won't expect anyone to know their secret." Bobby checked his ammunition. "How do we play this?" Before anyone could answer, a new sound echoed down from above. Cain's voice, sharp with anger. "Mitchell's attacking head-on like the fool." "He is. Weber's people are trying to flank us from the west, but where—" A pause. "Where's the girl and Caldwell?" Sarah's hand found the wooden horses in her pocket. Everything had led to this moment. "Up those stairs," Old Jack pointed to. "A narrow wooden staircase leads straight to the study. Used to be the old mining office." Hank's hand touched Sarah's arm in the darkness. No words were needed. They both remembered the last time they'd confronted evil together. "Mary, Bobby," Sarah whispered. "Cover the cellar door. Anyone tries to retreat down here. They won't get far," Mary promised, racking her shotgun. Sarah and Hank started up the stairs, each step carefully placed to avoid creaking. Old Jack followed, his prospector's instinct for dangerous ground proving useful even inside. Through gaps in the wooden risers, they caught glimpses of the room above. Cain paced before a large window, watching the battle below. 3 men stood, guard, while 2 more worked at a telegraph. "Send word to every badge on our payroll," Cain was saying. "I want them all here by sundown. Caldwell wants to play marshal. Let's show him what real law enforcement looks like." They reached the top of the stairs. Sarah looked at Hank, saw her own resolution mirrored in his eyes. No more running, no more hiding. She wrapped her fingers around the 2 wooden horses one last time, then drew her rifle. Hank's voice, when it came, was clear and strong. "That's not law you're enforcing, Cain. It's fear." They burst into the room together, weapons ready. Cain spun, his face twisting from shock to rage. "You," he snarled, reaching for his gun, "should have known you'd find the back door. Like a snake in the dark." "No," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Like justice. It finds a way." Outside, the sound of gunfire intensified. Through the window, she glimpsed Weber's forces beginning their assault. The trap was closing. Cain's men looked uncertain, glancing between their boss and the new territorial marshal's star on Hank's chest. "Think carefully," Hank told them, "about which side of the law you want to be on when this ends." One of the telegraph operators lowered his gun. Then another guard stepped back. Cain's face contorted. "Cowards! I'll show you what happens to—" His draw was fast, blindingly so. But Hank had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. 2 shots rang out as one. Gunsmoke hung thick in the air. Cain staggered backward, crimson blooming across his chest, his shot having gone wild as Hank's bullet found its mark. His eyes were wide with disbelief as he collapsed against the window frame. "Impossible," he gasped. "You're just a broken man, a ghost." "No," Hank stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years. "I'm the law you corrupted, the justice you betrayed." Cain's remaining men dropped their weapons, hands raised in surrender. Outside, the battle's tide had turned. Weber's forces had breached the western approach, while Thomas Mitchell's group drove forward from the main road. Sarah kept her rifle trained on the prisoners as Bobby and Mary emerged from the cellar. But her attention was on Cain, who struggled to speak through blood-stained lips. "Your wife," he wheezed, trying to hurt Hank one last time. "She begged, before they killed her, begged like your daughter." Hank moved with deadly purpose, but Sarah reached Cain first. She grabbed his collar, forcing him to look at her. "I didn't beg," she said quietly. "When your men tied me to that fence post, I didn't beg. Neither did his family. That's what you never understood about breaking people, Cain. Sometimes they forge themselves stronger in the fire." She released him, and Cain slumped to the floor, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. then glazed over. Marshal Cain, the man who'd hunted Hank for 15 years, was dead. Sarah. Hank's voice was gentle. She turned to find him holding out Emma's letter, the one that had revealed his wife's true motives. Without a word, she added the 2 wooden horses, one carved in rescue, one carved in strength. "It's over," she said. A commotion from outside drew their attention. Thomas Mitchell burst through the door, rifle ready, then stopped short at the scene before him. More men followed: Weber, Doc Wilson, honest lawmen from neighboring towns who'd answered the call. "The Blackwood riders are surrendering," her father reported. "Once they saw Cain's personal guard throw down arms." He trailed off, looking at his daughter with pride and lingering concern. "We got the telegraph messages too," Weber added. "Every corrupt badge Cain tried to call in, evidence enough to clean up 3 territories." Hank nodded, then did something that surprised them all. He unpinned his marshal's star and held it out to Sarah. "No," she said, understanding his gesture, "but refusing it. That belongs on you, but—" She lifted the wooden horses. "These belong to both of us. Our story, our justice." A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he repinned the star. Around them, men began leading prisoners out while Doc Wilson tended to the wounded. The sun was setting over the Wyoming territory, painting the sky in colors of redemption. Bobby cleared his throat. "Town's going to need a deputy marshal, someone who knows what justice really means." Sarah felt Hank's eyes on her, saw the question there. The wooden horses in her hand seemed to come alive with possibility. "Reckon they will," she said, and her smile held the promise of tomorrow. Dawn broke over Sweetwater a week later, painting the town in hues of new beginnings. The marshal's office had been transformed, gone were the dark curtains and locked doors of Cain's corrupt reign. Now sunlight streamed through clean windows, and the door stood open to all who sought justice. Sarah sat at her new deputy's desk, the 2 wooden horses standing guard beside a fresh badge. Her fingers traced the star's edges, still unfamiliar with its weight and meaning. A letter lay open before her, the territorial governor's official confirmation of her appointment. The door's hinges creaked, and Hank entered with 2 cups of coffee. His silence these days was different, chosen rather than forced, comfortable rather than haunted. He set 1 cup before her and leaned against the desk. "First prisoner transfer today," Sarah said, taking a sip. "Bobby's leading the escort. Cain's former men finally facing federal judges." Hank nodded, his eyes falling on Emma's letter, now framed on the wall beside the wanted posters. "She would have liked you," he said softly. Sarah touched one of the wooden horses. "She helped make this possible. Her strength, her sacrifice. It kept you whole enough to find your way back." "To find my way here," he corrected, and the look they shared held volumes. The morning stage brought Mary Wilson carrying her father's medical bag. 3 more families returned today," she reported. "The Henderson place, the Turners, and the old Clayton Ranch, all driven out by the Blackwoods. Last year." "The valley's healing," Sarah observed. "Speaking of healing," Mary opened the bag and withdrew a package wrapped in brown paper. "Pa found this in Cole's things. Thought you should have it." Sarah unwrapped the package carefully. Inside lay a silver-framed photograph, creased but intact. A young woman and a little girl sat on a porch, a wooden horse visible on the railing behind them. Emma and Katie Caldwell, preserved in time. Hank's breath caught. His hand trembled as he lifted the photograph, seeing his family's faces clearly for the first time in 15 years. "They're smiling," he whispered. "Of course they are," Sarah said gently. "They're looking at you." The moment was interrupted by running feet. Young Tommy Weber, the blacksmith's son, burst through the door. "Deputy Sarah, Marshal, come quick. Someone's stealing Mr. Henderson's horses!" Sarah was on her feet instantly, checking her gun. Hank already had his hat in hand. "Just common horse thieves this time," she said with a slight smile. "No corruption, no revenge. Almost seems simple." "Justice usually is," Hank replied. "It's people who make it complicated." They mounted up outside the office, the morning sun at their backs. Sarah saw faces in the windows, townspeople watching their new law ride out, not with fear, as they'd watched Cain, but with trust. The wooden horses stayed on her desk, supporting Emma's photograph between them, one carved in darkness, one carved in dawn, together telling a story of survival, justice, and redemption. "Ready?" Hank asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah touched her deputy's star, feeling its rightness. Always. They rode out together, two souls forged stronger. By fire, while behind them Sweetwater stirred to life under the promising Wyoming sky. The horse thieves' trail led toward the high country, where late spring snow still capped the peaks. Sarah read the signs with practiced ease. 3 riders, moving fast but not carefully, confident they wouldn't be pursued so quickly. "They don't know this valley anymore," she said, studying a set of tracks. "Taking the long way around Miller's Creek." Hank nodded in agreement. Where Cain's corrupt regime would have ignored such crimes, the new law rode swift and sure. They cut across the creek's bend, making up time lost in town. The pursuit led them past the old fence post where their story had begun. Someone had torn it down recently, Sarah suspected Weber's boys, and planted wildflowers in its place. Rather than a marker of pain, it had become a symbol of change. They caught up to the thieves near Thunder Ridge. 2 were local troublemakers, young men who'd worked as muscle for the Blackwoods. The 3rd made Sarah's hand tighten on her reins, Jake Blackwood's younger brother, Will. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice carrying over the wind. "You boys want to do this the easy way?" Will Blackwood wheeled his horse around, sneering. "Well, if it ain't the little girl who got my brother killed. Playing deputy now?" "Not playing," Hank said quietly, but his hand stayed clear of his gun. They'd both learned when violence was necessary and when words could serve justice better. Sarah dismounted slowly, deliberate. "Your brother made his choice, Will. Same as Cain, same as Cole. Now you've got one to make. What choice? Rot in and prison while everything my family built gets torn down?" "Everything they stole, you mean," Sarah corrected. "But no, your choice is simpler. Be more than your brother's shadow. Help rebuild instead of destroy." The 2 younger thieves exchanged glances, then dropped their reins. Will's face twisted with rage and grief. "You don't understand," he spat. "Jake was all I had." "I understand loss," Sarah said, touching her badge, "and I understand choosing who you become after." She took a step forward. "Your brother tied me to a post and left me to die. But here I stand, offering you a different path." Will's hand hovered over his gun. Hank tensed, but Sarah held up a calming hand. "The valley's changing, Will. You can change with it, or you can end up like Jake. Your choice." Long seconds passed, marked only by the wind's moan through the rocks. Finally, Will's shoulders slumped. His gun belt hit the ground. "Pa always said Jake would get us all killed," he whispered. "Guess he was right." They rode back to town with 3 peaceful prisoners and 5 recovered horses. Word of how they'd handled it spread quickly. Justice tempered with mercy, strength wrapped in compassion. That evening, Sarah added a note to the day's report. W. Blackwood surrendered voluntarily, recommending reduced sentence in exchange for testimony about remaining gang connections. Hank read it over her shoulder and nodded approval. On her desk, the wooden horses stood witness, while Emma and Katie's photograph caught the last sunlight. "Think he'll really change?" Sarah asked. "You did," Hank replied. "I did." His hand found hers briefly. Sometimes people just need to be cut free. 1 month after Will Blackwood's surrender, Sarah stood on the steps of the marshal's office, watching Sweetwater come alive in the morning light. The town had changed. Not just in the fresh paint on buildings or the new families moving in, but in the way people carried themselves. Heads held higher, shoulders straight, fear replaced by purpose. Weber's smithy rang with honest work instead of protection payments. The general store's shelves stayed stocked now that the Blackwoods weren't demanding their cut. Even the saloon had transformed under new ownership. Mary Wilson's father had bought it with his savings, turning it from a den of corruption into a respectable gathering place. "Mail's in," Bobby announced, bringing her a stack of letters. "Including this." Sarah recognized the territorial governor's seal. Inside, she found Will Blackwood's reduced sentence, along with permission to convert the old Blackwood ranch into something new. "Perfect timing," she said, just as Hank rode up with Thomas Mitchell. Her father dismounted stiffly. His leg would never fully heal from the battle, but his eyes were bright. "Survey's done. Land's good for what you're planning." They spread the papers on Sarah's desk, between the wooden horses that still stood guard. The plans showed the Blackwood Ranch transformed into a home for orphan children, a place of new beginnings built on the ashes of corruption. "Will's agreed to help," Sarah told them. "Says it's what his mother would have wanted before Jake turned their name to darkness." Hank studied the plans with careful attention. Since breaking his silence, his words had gained weight, each one chosen with deliberation. "Katie would be 17 now," he said softly, looking at his daughter's photograph. "Maybe teaching the little ones to ride." Sarah touched his arm gently. They'd grown comfortable with such moments. Grief shared was grief halved, and healing came in many forms. The door opened again, bringing Mary Wilson with fresh coffee and news. "First group of children arrives next week. 5 of them, all from families lost to gang violence across the territory." 6, Hank corrected. He pulled a letter from his coat. "Got word from Fort Smith. They found another. Girl's parents were killed by Cain's men years back." Sarah saw. The others exchanged glances. They all knew what this meant to him, a chance to help someone the way he hadn't been able to help Katie. "We'll need a name," Thomas Mitchell said, "for the home." Sarah picked up one of the wooden horses, weathered, now but still standing strong. "How about Emma's Gate, an entrance to new beginnings?" Hank's breath caught. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. She'd like that. Outside, school bells rang. Sarah watched children running to the newly reopened schoolhouse, their laughter carrying on the wind. Among them was Tommy Webber, wearing a deputy's star whittled from wood, a gift from Hank. "Time for rounds," she said, settling her gun belt. Hank nodded, already moving toward the door. They'd developed an easy rhythm these past weeks, words often unnecessary between them. As they mounted up, Sarah saw Will Blackwood leading a work, grew toward the old ranch, ready to begin its transformation. The valley was healing, one choice at a time. "You ever miss the silence?" she asked Hank as they rode out. He considered this, then shook his head. Silence was for surviving. Words are for living. Behind them, Sweetwater stirred with honest purpose, while ahead, the Wyoming sky promised a future worth protecting. 3 months to the day after Cain's fall, Sarah stood at Emma's Gate, watching the morning sun paint the new sign in shades of gold. 6 children played in the yard, their laughter carrying across land that had once known only darkness. Will Blackwood sat on the porch, teaching a young boy to carve his own wooden horse. "Never thought I'd see this place bring life instead of death," Thomas Mitchell said, joining his daughter. His limp was less pronounced now, healing like the valley itself. "Sarah!" a small voice called out. Lucy, the girl from Fort Smith, came, running up with something clutched in her hands. "Marshal Hank made this for me." It was a wooden horse, expertly carved. But unlike the others, this one had a tiny rider, a girl with flowing hair, sitting tall in the saddle. "Says it's how he remembers his Katie," Lucy explained, "and how he sees me now." Sarah touched the carving gently, understanding its meaning. Hank had started making them for all the children, each one unique, each telling its own story of hope. From the marshal's office in town came the sound of the morning bell, clear and strong. No longer a warning of danger, but a reminder of justice served. "Time for my rounds," Sarah said, checking her badge. She found Hank at their usual spot, the wildflower patch where the fence post had once stood. He was placing a fresh carved horse among the blooms, while Emma and Katie's photograph rested against his saddle. "Leaving something behind?" she asked. "No," he replied, his voice sure and steady. "Setting something free." They rode into town together, past Weber's smithy where Tommy proudly wore his wooden star, past the saloon where Doc Wilson and Mary served coffee to honest working men. The jail stood empty most days now, its cells collecting dust. At the marshal's office, Bobby waited with the morning mail. "Governor's coming next week," he reported. "Wants to see how the valley's changes might work elsewhere?" Sarah hung her hat on the rack between the wooden horses on her desk. The first carved in rescue, the second in strength. They'd been joined by others, each marking a milestone in the valley's rebirth. "Think we'll ever go back?" Bobby asked. "To how it was before?" "No," Hank said, touching his marshal's star. "The past stays past, but it teaches us how to build the future." Through the window, Sarah watched more riders approaching, families coming to settle, drawn by tales of a valley where justice had finally taken root, where a girl once tied to a fence post had risen to defend others, where a silent man had found his voice in service of the law. "We've got work to do," she said, but paused at the door. "Hank?" He turned, and in his eyes she saw everything they'd built together. Trust forged in fire, strength born of suffering, love grown from justice served. "Thank you," she said simply, "for cutting me free that day." His smile was gentle. "Thank you for showing me how to be free too." They rode out together beneath the endless Wyoming sky, two souls who had found their purpose in healing a wounded land. Behind them, the wooden horses stood guard over a hard-won peace, while ahead, the future beckoned with the promise of dawns yet to come. And in the end, that was all any of them had ever truly wanted: the freedom to write their own story, one choice at a time, under the watchful eyes of justice and grace. "See you, Ton,"